the echoes of a forgotten silence, the dawn of digital archaeology. Imagine, for a moment, a world where the very ground beneath your feet is vibrating with the silent screams of a civilization that died long before the first stone of the Great Pyramid was ever laid. For millennia, we have walked over these ghosts, unaware that the dirt and ash of history were not just burying bones, but an urgent message addressed specifically to us. Since the dawn of human record-keeping, we have been obsessed with the past, scouring old stones, clutching broken pieces of pottery, and staring at faded paintings in the hopes of finding a reflection of ourselves in the lives long gone. We have found many keys, but the most powerful ones, the ancient languages that hold the thoughts, records, and complex ideas of our ancestors, have largely remained locked in a cold, impenetrable mystery. Before we dive deeper into the chilling revelation that AI has recently unearthed from a remote mountain site, if you are captivated by these mysteries of our forgotten history, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Your support allows us to continue exploring the darkest corners of human history and bringing these lost voices back to life. For centuries, these scripts were considered puzzles beyond human reach. We stared at the Voynich manuscript, a book filled with botanical hallucinations and celestial diagrams that have baffled the world's greatest scholars for hundreds of years, and we saw only a wall of silence. We looked at the tiny seals of the Indus Valley civilization, carved with symbols of power and trade over 4,000 years ago, and we found only resistance. These were not just dead languages. They were locked vaults containing the survival blueprints of humanity, and we simply did not have the combination. The shadow of the Rosetta Stone. Our traditional understanding of history has always relied on a stroke of luck, a Rosetta Stone moment. When that slab of granodiorite was discovered, carved with the same message in Greek and Egyptian hieroglyphs, it was as if a light had been switched on in a dark room. Suddenly, 3,000 years of Egyptian history were no longer just pictures of birds and eyes. They were accounts of kings, tax records, and poetry. But the tragedy of archaeology is that most discoveries do not come with a translation key. Most of what remains of our ancestors is broken, faded by the sun, or too short to provide the statistical context needed for a human brain to decode. This is why so many voices have stayed silent for so long. However, we have entered a new era, the dawn of digital archaeology. In the past decade, we have stopped relying solely on the limits of human intuition and started building a partner in discovery: artificial intelligence. AI is not a human expert. It is a system of patterns and data, capable of scanning millions of combinations in a fraction of the time it takes a scholar to sip their coffee. While a human is excellent at creative thinking and understanding culture, we are fundamentally limited by our inability to hold vast, complex data structures in our minds simultaneously. AI, through neural networks inspired by the human brain itself, can recognize structures in sequences of symbols and sounds that our eyes simply cannot perceive. The ghosts of Mount Vesuvius. To understand the sheer power of this technology, we must look at the carbonized ghosts of the Roman world. In 79 AD, the eruption of Mount Vesuvius did more than just bury the city of Pompeii. It encased the nearby town of Herculaneum in a tomb of volcanic ash and heat. Among the ruins were hundreds of scrolls, but they were not the scrolls you see in museums. They were carbonized lumps, fragile as a butterfly's wing, looking more like pieces of charcoal than literature. For nearly 2,000 years, human hands could not touch them without turning them to dust. But AI, combined with hyperspectral imaging and X-ray technology, changed everything. By using algorithms trained on ancient Greek scripts, researchers were able to virtually unroll these scrolls, The AI didn't just see the charcoal. It recognized the subtle changes in density where the ink once sat, reconstructing letters and words that had been hidden for 20 centuries. This was the first time we realized that AI was not just a tool for the future, but a resurrection machine for the past. It was the first hint that we might finally be able to read the messages that were never meant to be forgotten. The 7,000-year-old mystery. Yet, even the Roman scrolls are young compared to what was recently discovered in a remote, mountainous region far from the reach of modern civilization. For decades, archaeologists had known about a site containing strange, etched stones and clay tablets, but they were dismissed as ritualistic art or decorative symbols. The script was unlike anything seen before, organized, repeating, and hauntingly deliberate. Traditional linguistic methods failed because there was no Rosetta Stone, no related language to act as a bridge. It was here that the AI system, known for its work on the Danube script, a 7,000-year-old set of symbols from Europe, was applied. Just as it had done with the Danube artifacts, the neural networks began to notice things that the human eye had missed. It saw syntax, where we saw decoration. It identified grammar, where we saw random markings. The AI wasn't just translating words, it was identifying the logical relationships between symbols, proving that this was a fully developed, complex language. And the message it began to produce was not a record of a king's vanity or a merchant's trade. It was a warning, the silent architecture of the mountain cache. The remote archaeological site, where the most chilling discovery was made, sits in a mountainous region, tucked away from the sprawling progress of major human settlements. For years, it was nothing more than a curiosity for local explorers, a collection of carved stones and clay tablets hidden within the shadows of the peaks. When researchers first arrived, they found fragments of ancient codices and inscriptions etched with a precision that seemed to defy the primitive tools of the era. These were not random scrawls. They were organized into long, hauntingly consistent sequences of repeating symbols. At first glance, the academic community fell back on familiar explanations. They believed these were ritualistic markings, perhaps recording the myths of a sun god or the simple ceremonies of a nomadic tribe. For decades, scholars applied every traditional tool in their arsenal, comparing the mountain symbols to Sumerian cuneiform, Egyptian hieroglyphs, and the linear scripts of the Aegean. But the mountain remained silent. Every attempt at translation failed because the script was fundamentally different from anything the human mind had categorized. This is the point where human intuition reached its limits. We are creatures of context and culture, but our brains are not designed to scan millions of possible combinations or to hold the statistical weight of every symbol in a sequence simultaneously. To unlock the mountain cache, we needed a mind that did not sleep, a mind that could see the invisible threads of logic connecting 1,000 fragments. This is why the application of artificial intelligence was a turning point. AI is not just a computer program. It is a system of machine learning and pattern recognition that learns to find structure in data where humans see only chaos. In this case, researchers utilized neural networks, complex systems loosely inspired by the biological architecture of the human brain, to look at the mountain script with fresh, digital eyes. The digital reconstruction of a lost mind. The AI didn't start by trying to find words. It started by finding the skeleton of the language. It began by clustering symbols and analyzing their frequency, identifying which characters appeared together and which were mutually exclusive. As the neural networks processed the sequences, they detected something that traditional archaeology had dismissed: a consistent, sophisticated syntax. The symbols were not just art. They were components of a fully developed language, with grammar rules that allowed for the expression of complex ideas like cause, effect, and prediction. The AI used predictive algorithms, the same type of technology that suggests the next word in your text messages, to reconstruct the probable word sequences of the damaged stones. It was like watching a ghost materialize out of the mist. What the AI found was a message that stunned the researchers who were monitoring the output. The translation was not a collection of myths or legends. It was a purposeful, deliberate communication directed toward future generations, people far removed from the civilization that had carved it. It was a message for us. The inscriptions contained chillingly direct phrases such as, "We watch this happen," "Prepare now," and "Remember this truth." Unlike the narrative storytelling of most ancient cultures, the tone of this message was one of urgent instruction. The grammar was not poetic. It was logical and action-oriented. The AI revealed that this ancient society had spent centuries observing the world with a level of scientific rigor we never expected. They documented environmental cycles, celestial movements, and human behavior patterns. The translation suggested that these people had witnessed recurring disasters, both natural upheavals and societal collapses, and had decided that the most important legacy they could leave was the knowledge required to prevent a repetition of their own demise. They were passing a torch across thousands of years of darkness, hoping that someone would eventually be smart enough to build the machinery required to see the light. The science of seeing the unseen. This breakthrough was made possible by more than just raw computing power. It relied on a combination of cutting-edge technologies that allow us to see what is invisible to the naked eye. In cases where the inscriptions were too faded or damaged by the elements, researchers used hyperspectral imaging, a process that captures light beyond the visible spectrum to reveal hidden layers of pigment or carving. They also employed diffusion models and generative AI to reconstruct sections of text that had been lost to erosion or physical breakage. These systems are trained on vast amounts of data from known languages, teaching them the general principles of how symbols relate to one another and how information is structured within a human communication system. By feeding the AI these global patterns, the system was able to recognize that the mountain script used repeated phrases as emphasis markers, functioning much like modern punctuation. It identified correlations between the symbols and astronomical phenomena, such as the appearance of comets, planetary alignments, and solar eclipses. The ancient authors weren't just writing about the stars. They were using the stars as a timestamp and a warning system. Other sections of the translated text corresponded with environmental shifts, describing prolonged droughts, seasonal changes, and rising waters. This was not folklore. It was actionable data. The message felt directed at our modern world because it addressed the very concerns we face today: shifting climates, environmental degradation, and the recognition of patterns that precede a crisis. The architects of the warning. But who were the people who left this digital time capsule? Archaeological evidence suggests they lived over 6,000 years ago in a region that was a crossroads of river valleys and rocky hills. Their society was far from primitive. They lived in organized settlements with designated areas for food storage, communal gatherings, and ritual spaces. They were a people defined by their environmental awareness. Their entire culture was built on the foundation of observation. They tracked rainfall patterns, seasonal cycles, and the movements of the heavens to plan their agriculture and their construction. They were connected to the world around them through trade networks that stretched into neighboring regions, exchanging metals and obsidian, which likely gave them a broader perspective on the systemic nature of human and environmental cycles. Their values were not centered on the worship of distant gods, but on the preservation of survival-critical information. They saw themselves as part of a long chain of human existence, and they felt a profound responsibility to those who would come after them. While other civilizations left behind monuments to their kings, this society left behind a library of warnings. They understood that the consequences of ignoring the signals of nature were absolute. By encoding these lessons in a script designed to be found and eventually deciphered, they were attempting to mitigate the risks for a future they knew would eventually face the same trials they did. The revelation that came from the remote mountain cache was not merely a linguistic breakthrough. It was a psychological shock to the researchers involved. As the AI systems began to process the long sequences of repeating symbols, they moved past the initial identification of structure and into the realm of semantic interpretation. The inscriptions were etched into carved stones, clay tablets, and fragments of ancient codices, all hidden for thousands of years in a region characterized by its isolation and rugged terrain. What had once been dismissed as decorative art was now revealed to be a purposeful, deliberate, and chillingly direct communication directed toward future generations. The content of the message stunned the academic community because of its focus on us, humans far removed from the civilization that created it. The AI reconstructed phrases that carried a heavy weight of urgency. We watch this happen, prepare now, and remember this truth. This was not a narrative of past glories or a catalog of gods, but a set of instructions emphasizing the observation of environmental cycles, celestial movements, and human behavior patterns. The ancient authors were not writing a story. They were documenting a recurring reality. The cycles of collapse. The heart of the decoded message lay in its description of cycles. The ancient people had witnessed recurring disasters, both natural and societal, and their goal was to pass this knowledge forward to prevent the repetition of their own collapse. The AI found that the message described the consequences of ignoring natural patterns and provided a blueprint for preparation. Unlike the myths or legends found in other cultures, the grammar and structure of these inscriptions indicated intentional, logical communication rather than ritualized symbolism. The symbols themselves reinforced this purposeful nature. The AI identified that symbols were grouped in consistent patterns reflecting logical relationships, with repeated phrases acting as emphasis markers, similar to modern punctuation. The word order suggested a complex grammar capable of expressing cause, effect, and prediction. This was the language of scientists, not just storytellers. In some sections, the AI successfully identified correlations between these symbolic descriptions and observable astronomical phenomena. The warning was synchronized with solar eclipses and comet appearances, planetary alignments, environmental patterns such as prolonged droughts and seasonal changes, flooding events that shifted the very geography of their world. This alignment between the symbols and observable physical events suggested that the warning was meant to convey actionable knowledge rather than mere folklore. It was a bridge built of data, spanning 6 millennia. Why the message feels directed at us? There are several reasons why this ancient warning resonates so strongly with our modern world. First, it utilizes universal concepts, the observation of nature, the recognition of human behavior, and the preparation for consequences that remain relevant regardless of the historical context. The message does not rely on local deities or specific cultural taboos. It relies on the cold, hard facts of the physical world. Second, the warning references cycles that match both ancient and modern data. For instance, sections of the text describe rising waters and shifting climates, descriptions that closely align with our contemporary concerns about environmental change. When the ancient authors wrote, "Prepare now," they were not speaking to their neighbors. They were speaking to anyone who would eventually witness the same signs they had. The deliberate emphasis on action conveys an intentionality that implies the authors knew their own civilization might not survive, but that humanity as a whole could, if it learned to listen. The reaction from the global expert community was a volatile mixture of astonishment, caution, and intrigue. Archaeologists were forced to recognize the technical sophistication of these creators, noting their systematic methods of recording knowledge. Linguists, meanwhile, acknowledged the AI's incredible ability to identify complex relationships between symbols that had been invisible to the human eye for generations. While some scholars speculated that the message was a direct record of observation intended as guidance, others remained cautious. They warned that modern humans might be projecting their own fears onto these ancient texts and emphasized the need for rigorous verification of every AI-generated interpretation. Despite the debate, a consensus emerged. This was a major breakthrough in understanding the communication abilities of ancient civilizations. Philosophical and scientific foundations. The discovery raised profound questions that touched the very core of our historical consciousness. Could an ancient society truly predict cyclical disasters with accuracy? Did they understand the patterns of climate and societal behavior well enough to leave meaningful guidance? The AI's translation suggested that at least part of the message was evidence of careful observation and pattern recognition, rather than myth or superstition. These creators recognized the value of passing knowledge across generations, anticipating a time when future humans might need it to survive or make informed choices. They were the first to engage in long-term societal planning on a millennial scale. Their legacy was not built in gold or stone monuments, but in the transmission of the most valuable resource they possessed, their understanding of the world's recurring rhythms. As we move deeper into the technical mechanics of how the AI achieved this translation, we begin to see that the machine was not just reading symbols. It was learning to think like the observers of the past. The science behind the translation is a story of how we taught a computer to understand a dead language that no living human had ever heard. The ghost in the machine, the science of digital resurrection. The process of decoding a language that has been silent for millennia is not merely a feat of linguistics. It is one of the most remarkable achievements at the intersection of archaeology and computer science. For decades, the limit of our knowledge was the limit of the human eye and the human lifespan. We were constrained by our biological inability to process the sheer volume of statistical noise present in ancient artifacts. But artificial intelligence changed the fundamental math of discovery. It was not magic, nor was it a sudden aha moment from a single genius. Instead, the success relied on carefully designed methods that allowed machines to detect deep patterns, reconstruct meaning, and assist human experts in interpreting texts that were once thought to be lost forever. Neural networks, the digital brain. At the heart of this digital resurrection are neural networks, computer systems designed to learn patterns in data. These networks are loosely inspired by the biological architecture of the human brain, featuring layers of interconnected nodes that can detect relationships and regularities that escape human perception. When the AI was first presented with the mountain script, it did not need to understand what the symbols meant immediately. In fact, giving it too much human context too early can sometimes lead to bias. Instead, the AI functioned like a master observer. It looked for consistent sequences of symbols, identifying which characters frequently traveled together. Repeated clusters, recognizing that certain groups of symbols acted as single units of meaning. Structural patterns, detecting the underlying syntax that suggests a formal language rather than random art. Over months of processing, these patterns became the basis for predicting words, phrases, and even the potential grammar rules that govern this lost society. The AI could see the skeleton of the language long before we could see its skin. The role of analogs and synthetic data. How do you teach a machine to read a language no one living has ever heard? The answer lies in the use of analogs. Researchers used known languages as templates to help the system recognize structural features that might exist in unknown scripts. They exposed the AI to large amounts of data from known writing systems, teaching it the general principles of how humans structure communication, how symbols relate to meaning, how sequences form structure, and how repetition conveys emphasis. In some cases, the team even generated synthetic data, creating sequences that imitated the possible rules of language to test the AI's ability to find logic in simulated chaos. This foundation allowed the system to transition from working on known scripts to tackling the completely unknown texts found in the mountain cache. Seeing through the damage, diffusion, and imaging. The challenge was not just linguistic, it was physical. Many of the inscriptions were carved on stones that had eroded over thousands of years, or on clay that had cracked and crumbled. To solve this, the AI used image-based techniques alongside pattern recognition. Diffusion models. This form of AI was used to digitally clean the inscriptions. Much like how modern software can remove noise from a photograph, these models could reconstruct missing or damaged visual information. Hyperspectral imaging. By capturing light beyond the visible spectrum, researchers revealed faded writing that had been invisible to the naked eye for centuries. Digital unrolling. Similar to the techniques used on the carbonized Herculaneum scrolls, AI algorithms allowed scholars to virtually unroll and read fragile materials without risking their physical destruction. By enhancing these images and removing the noise of time, AI provided readable sequences that were finally ready for linguistic analysis. It recovered information that without this technology would have been lost to the earth forever. The human gatekeeper, ethics and accuracy. Despite the incredible power of these digital tools, the process is fraught with risks. One of the most dangerous is overfitting, a phenomenon where the AI finds patterns that exist only in the specific data it was trained on, but do not reflect the true historical language. Even more concerning is the risk of hallucination, where the AI produces a translation that appears perfectly coherent and poetic, but is entirely inaccurate or misleading. Without careful verification, these digital ghosts could lead us into false narratives. This is why human-AI collaboration remains the cornerstone of modern archaeology. Linguists and historians must act as the ultimate judges, checking the AI's suggestions against historical, environmental, and cultural evidence. The machine accelerates the discovery by highlighting structural relationships, but the human provides the context, the heart, and the judgment. This partnership is an iterative cycle. Initial predictions are tested, and if they prove inconsistent or illogical, the system is retrained and adjusted. Each iteration brings us closer to a translation that aligns with both the cold logic of mathematics and the warm reality of human history. In some instances, this has allowed us to identify semantic groupings, sets of symbols that correspond to specific actions or environmental observations, which are the key to understanding the functional purpose of the ancient warning. The architects of time, a civilization driven by observation. The civilization that constructed the mountain cache was not a collection of primitive nomads, but a highly structured society that existed at least 6,000 years ago. They flourished in a region where fertile river valleys met rugged, rocky hills, creating a landscape of both abundance and extreme environmental variability. Archaeological excavations have revealed that these people did not merely inhabit the land, they engineered it. Their settlements show evidence of advanced planning, with clearly designated zones for food storage, communal gatherings, and spaces dedicated to rituals. They utilized advanced tools for construction and agriculture, suggesting a society that prioritized efficiency and long-term stability. What truly set this culture apart from its contemporaries was its fundamental obsession with observation and preservation. While other ancient peoples were building massive monuments to the ego of their kings, this society was building a library of the Earth's behavior. Their survival depended on an intimate, scientific understanding of their environment. Every aspect of their lives, from the timing of crop planting to the architectural integrity of their homes, was shaped by a meticulous tracking of seasonal cycles, rainfall patterns, and astronomical movements. The science of the stars and the soil. For this forgotten society, astronomy was not a distant mystical pursuit. It was a practical necessity. Researchers have found evidence that they maintained a systematic record of celestial events, including the exact timing and duration of solar eclipses, the shifting positions of the planets in the night sky, the appearance of comets and other transient cosmic phenomena. These records were not kept for the sake of curiosity alone. They were used to identify long-term patterns that could predict changes in the Earth's climate and seasonal rhythms. Their religion, if it can be called that, was centered on the concept of balance between humanity and nature. Instead of seeking the intervention of supernatural gods to solve their problems, their rituals focused on maintaining harmony with the environment and respecting its limits. They understood that they were not masters of the world, but participants in a much larger, cyclical system. A global network of knowledge. This was not an isolated community living in a vacuum. Archaeological evidence indicates they were part of a vast trade network, exchanging precious materials like obsidian and metals, as well as agricultural products with neighboring regions. This interaction was crucial to their intellectual development. By communicating with other cultures across different geographies, they were able to observe broader environmental patterns and human behavior that would have been invisible from a single location. This big picture view likely contributed to their realization that environmental and societal shifts were not localized anomalies, but part of a repeating, systemic cycle. It was this realization that led them to move beyond oral traditions and myths. They saw the inherent fragility of human memory and decided to encode their most vital lessons in a script designed to withstand the erosion of time. Data versus myth. A deliberate choice. One of the most striking aspects of the AI-decoded message is how much it differs from the typical myths and legends found in other ancient records. While cultures from Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica often described great floods or droughts through the lens of divine punishment or heroic epics, the mountain cache inscriptions are different. They lack the flowery, narrative language of folklore. Instead, the messages are intentional, logical, and structured. The AI revealed that the creators used their script to provide practical knowledge on how to recognize the warning signs of environmental collapse, actionable instructions for preparation and survival, logical frameworks for understanding the consequences of ignoring the signals of nature. This deliberate effort to communicate technical guidance across millennia reflects a culture deeply concerned with the well-being of people they would never meet. They viewed knowledge as a humanitarian tool, a shield against the inevitable return of the cycles they had survived. By encoding these warnings, they aimed to ensure that their descendants and the civilizations that followed would not have to start from zero when the waters began to rise or the soil began to fail. The burden of interpretation. As we look at these translations today, we are faced with a profound challenge. Scholars continue to debate whether we are truly reading a warning from the future, or if we are simply projecting our modern anxieties onto ancient stone. While the AI has provided the bridge to translate these symbols, human expertise is required to give them context. We must ask, did they truly foresee the challenges we face today? Or were they simply recording the tragedies of their own time? Regardless of the answer, the clarity, repetition, and structure of the message make one thing certain. This was an act of intentional, long-term communication. They wanted to be heard. They wanted their observations of the stars, the climate, and human social patterns to serve as a guide for those who would come after them. As we prepare to look at the practical insights hidden in these messages, we must acknowledge the humility and foresight of a people who, 6,000 years ago, already knew that the greatest threat to humanity is its own tendency to forget. Ancient insight and contemporary challenges. The mirror of history. Once a dead language has been successfully decoded, the focus shifts from the mechanics of linguistics to the weight of interpretation. The AI translation of the mountain cache revealed a warning that was clearly deliberate, structured, and intended to bridge the gap between millennia. To understand how this message applies to us, we must look at the specific intersections of their past and our present. The records preserved by this ancient civilization provide insights that resonate with our most pressing contemporary challenges, including climate change, social instability, and the risks inherent in our technological and political decisions. The environmental parallel. Cycles of Earth and Sky. The decoded warning contains extensive references to environmental and cosmic patterns. The inscriptions do not speak of vengeful gods, but of physical realities. They describe massive floods and prolonged droughts. They document shifting climates and extreme weather events. They correlate these terrestrial events with astronomical phenomena, such as comets, solar eclipses, and planetary alignments. In modern terms, these observations are the ancient equivalent of climate science. The authors of the warning recognize that ignoring natural cycles inevitably results in disaster. By documenting these patterns and emphasizing the need for preparation, they demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of environmental cause and effect. This insight is hauntingly relevant today as we face rising sea levels, ecological disruption, and a global climate crisis. The message serves as a reminder that we are not the first to witness these shifts, but we may be the last if we fail to respect the limits of our ecosystem. The societal mirror. Conflict and cooperation. Beyond the physical environment, the ancient warning focuses heavily on human behavior and social collapse. The AI identified patterns in the text that describe the internal failure of communities. The inscriptions detail conflicts over dwindling resources, where competition replaced cooperation. Population, pressures that strained the social fabric and infrastructure. The breakdown in cooperation that left societies vulnerable to external shocks. This ancient diagnosis of societal failure mirrors the risks we face in the 21st century. Modern nations struggle with political instability, economic inequality, and the potential for collapse due to a lack of foresight. The ancient authors observed that communities which ignored these social signals were far more likely to suffer irreparable harm. Their message encourages us to reflect on the importance of resilience and cooperation as survival strategies rather than just political ideals. Universal urgency, beyond myth and legend. The tone of the mountain inscriptions is what truly sets them apart from the historical records of other civilizations. The language conveys an actionable urgency. Phrases such as "prepare now" and "remember this truth" suggest that the authors were not recording history for history's sake. They were providing a guide for the future. Unlike myths or legends, which often couch truth in metaphor, this message is a direct instruction manual for survival. This universal applicability makes the warning uniquely compelling because it transcends historical context and addresses the fundamental responsibilities of humans today. It suggests that the patterns of decision-making, resource management, and societal priorities are constant throughout human history. Some interpretations even point to parallels between ancient descriptions and modern existential risks, such as the dangers of unchecked technological development or the misuse of energy resources. The philosophical crossroads. As we stand at the intersection of AI-powered archaeology and the modern world, we find ourselves at a philosophical crossroads. The ancient warning suggests that societies must recognize patterns and take preventative measures long before a crisis reaches its peak. This raises a vital question. Can modern humans actually act on lessons left for us thousands of years ago? Or are we destined to repeat the mistakes of the past despite our superior technology? The AI has provided the bridge, but the responsibility of the crossing remains ours. We now have access to a data set that spans 7,000 years of human observation. The question is no longer whether we can hear these ancient voices, but whether we have the wisdom to listen. The final chapter of this journey explores the future of this partnership between human and machine, and the legacy we will choose to leave for those who come after us. The horizon of digital archaeology, a new era for humanity. The successful translation of a language that had been silent for thousands of years marks a definitive new era for both archaeology and artificial intelligence. This breakthrough demonstrates that AI is not merely a tool for modern convenience or commercial optimization, but a profound bridge to the distant past. The implications of this are enormous. By combining advanced computational models with deep human expertise, researchers have unlocked knowledge that had been hidden for over 7,000 years. This achievement fundamentally reshapes our understanding of how technology and humanity can interact to preserve, interpret, and learn from ancient knowledge. The global renaissance of lost scripts. One of the most significant developments arising from this discovery is the future of decoding lost languages. We are witnessing a global shift as universities, research institutions, and collaborative international projects increasingly invest in AI initiatives focused specifically on ancient scripts. These initiatives are no longer isolated. They apply a sophisticated arsenal of neural networks, pattern recognition, diffusion models, and image processing to manuscripts, inscriptions, and artifacts that are centuries or even millennia old. The scope of these projects is ambitious. They aim not only to decode known but damaged scripts, but also to attempt translations of completely unknown languages that have baffled scholars for generations. By sharing data and methods across borders, researchers can combine their expertise, improve the underlying algorithms, and drastically reduce the time required for major discoveries. In the next few decades, it is highly likely that AI will provide access to hundreds or even thousands of previously unreadable texts, opening vast new windows into the lives, beliefs, and knowledge of civilizations we once thought were permanently lost to time. The digital bastion, preservation, as a humanitarian act. Beyond translation, AI has become essential in the preservation of our cultural heritage. Many of the world's most important ancient scripts, tablets, and inscriptions are incredibly fragile. Scrolls can disintegrate upon touch. Stones can erode under the pressure of the elements. And organic materials, such as papyrus or clay, can decay if they are not stored in perfectly controlled environments. AI assists in these vital digitization projects by capturing high-resolution images that preserve the finest details of an artifact's surface, enhancing faded or damaged text that the human eye can no longer perceive, reconstructing missing sections using learned patterns from similar historical documents. These digital archives ensure that human knowledge survives even if the physical objects themselves eventually succumb to the ravages of time. Moreover, these digitized scripts can be shared globally, allowing scholars from different countries to collaborate without the need to transport or risk further damage to the original materials. In this sense, preservation is both a technological and a humanitarian effort, safeguarding human memory and cultural identity for the generations yet to come. The ethical compass of the machine. Despite these triumphs, the integration of AI into archaeology brings critical ethical considerations to the forefront. While AI can translate symbols and reconstruct texts, it is not infallible. Machines can hallucinate patterns where none exist, suggest inaccurate translations, or overfit data, meaning they create outputs that appear plausible but are not historically accurate. The danger of misinterpretation is real. It could lead to the creation of false narratives about ancient societies, distorting our understanding of their beliefs or their scientific knowledge. To prevent this, scholars must carefully verify AI-generated translations using archaeological context, historical knowledge, and cross-disciplinary expertise. Ethical AI use in archaeology requires transparency, rigorous peer review, and a constant awareness of the limitations of machine learning. Humans remain essential for judgment, verification, and interpretation, ensuring that technological advancements enhance our understanding rather than distort it. A legacy of continuity and responsibility. The project of translating a 7,000-year-old warning does more than just fill in the blanks of history. It shapes humanity's historical consciousness. Hearing a message from people who lived millennia ago reminds us of our own continuity, humility, and responsibility. These ancient authors observed their environment, recorded its patterns, and sought to guide future generations with an altruism that spans the ages. By understanding their efforts, we recognize that humans across time have shared the same fundamental concerns: survival in a changing world, the observation of nature as a means of understanding our place in the universe, social cooperation as the foundation of progress, preparation for the unexpected to protect those who come after us. This awareness encourages a profound reflection on our place in history. It highlights the importance of learning from the past rather than assuming that modern knowledge is inherently superior to ancient wisdom. The partnership between humans and AI illustrates a broader lesson. Technology expands our potential, but humans must guide its application responsibly, whether in archaeology, science, or societal planning. Final reflections. As the ancient voices speak to us through the medium of silicon and code, they remind us that the past and future are inextricably connected. The knowledge preserved over millennia calls for our attention, our ethical consideration, and most importantly, our action. What we choose to do with these insights, whether we listen to the warnings of the mountain cache or ignore them as our predecessors might have, will determine the trajectory of our own civilization. It will decide whether history repeats its tragic cycles or whether humanity finally rises to meet its challenges with awareness, humility, and wisdom. If you found this journey through the dawn of digital archaeology and the secrets of the ancient warning thought-provoking, please remember to like this video and subscribe to our channel to stay updated on the latest breakthroughs that are redefining our past and our future. Together, we can continue to uncover the voices that time forgot.